All doing? Welcome once again to Kits Rock Review. It's been a while since I've broadcast live, so thought I'd do another Kits Rock Review. And I'm going to start out by asking you a question. Do you know where you were on April 24th, 1989? Well, I don't know exactly where I was, but that was my senior year of high school, so I was probably in class. And here's my senior yearbook, by the way. And long hair, no beard. Well, if you look at the picture, you can sort of tell I had a little bit of a mullet going on there. But so I was senior in high school, April 24th, 1989. Don't exactly know what I was doing. There's a girl I had a crush on, so I was probably staring at her for a good chunk of the day. She was in a lot of my classes. But anyway, the reason I brought up that date is because on April 24th, 1989, this album came out. Tom Petty's first solo album, Full Moon Fever. And you know, this has become an important album in my life. It's one of my favorite albums. I remember cruising around Rome with my friends. I actually had it on cassette back then, not on CD, and we'd put it in the tape deck of my little black Ford Escort when we drove around. You know, listening, especially "Running Down a Dream," going down Black River Boulevard. But you probably know all the hit songs that are on this album. You know, like "Free Fallin'," "Running Down a Dream," and "I Won't Back Down." But there are other great songs on the album besides that. You know, the apartment song. I used to live in a two-room apartment. People knocking on my door. I'm sorry, I don't mean to sing. There's another song called "All Right for Now." He covers the Birds on here with "Feel a Whole Lot Better," and the last song on the album is called "Zombie Zoo," which is, believe it or not, it's one of the last performances that Roy Orbison did before he died. So, if I'm doing my math right, in a couple weeks it will be April 24th, 2021. So it'll be the 33rd anniversary of this album coming out. So I decided, why don't we just talk about Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers today and see what we can see. I'll tell you about my favorite Tom Petty solo albums, my favorite Tom Petty and the Heartbreaker records, maybe even a little bit about some concerts I saw with Tom Petty. But my favorite Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers record is this one, Music from She's the One. This is a soundtrack, came out in 1996. I was just out of college. It's not a very popular Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers record, but I still love it anyway. I love listening to this record. It's a soundtrack for a movie. She's the One, that actually starred Jennifer Aniston. Tom Petty was asked by Edward Burns, the director of the movie, for a song, and instead he came back and gave them an entire album of songs. Walls is probably the biggest hit off this, and I love that song, Walls. There's another song on here called Climb That Hill, which is about getting back on your feet after you're down. This is the only Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers album that does not have an official drummer, because Stan Lynch left the band either right before or during the making of the record. So there's no official Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers drummer on this. They used a bunch of session drummers. But one of those session drummers is a pretty famous guy. His name is Ringo Starr, and he's on the song called Hung Up and Overdue. And there are two covers that Tom Petty has on this album. He covers Change the Locks, which is Lucinda Williams, and he covers a song by Beck called Asshole. So I would recommend this to anybody. Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, songs from She's the One. Get it, you won't be disappointed. Awesome album. And a lot of the songs from this album that Tom Petty recorded and released on this album, they actually were written for the Wildflowers album. So that's the next one I'm going to talk about, right here, Wildflowers. This came out in 1994. I was living in Canada, believe it or not, when this came out. You don't usually think of Tom Petty in Canada, but I associate this with Canada because I was in graduate school, and this came out, and I wrote a lot of papers, a lot of graduate papers for graduate school. I'm sorry, while listening to this. You probably know the hits from this one. You Don't Know How It Feels, You Wreck Me, It's Good to Be King, the title cut Wildflowers. But there's a lot of other great songs: "The Cabin Down Below," "To Find a Friend," "A Higher Place." One song that I'm always familiar with when I listen to this album is "It's Time to Move On," because after I finished typing all these papers on my old Mac, I had one of those old box Macs, Mac Classics. After I finished typing my papers on that Mac, listening to "It's Time to Move On" was just something I had to do because I was done with the paper. Um, and even though this is officially it's Tom Petty's second solo album. All the Heartbreakers, except for Stan Lynch, because he was either had just left or was about to leave, all of them appear on this. And the reason the reason Tom Petty made it a solo album was he said he didn't want to be restrained by the particular instruments that the band members played. But it's effectively a Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers record. In fact, Mike Campbell, who's the Heartbreakers lead guitarist, is one of the co-producers of this record. So even though it's a Tom Petty solo album, it really is a Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers record. And speaking of Wildflowers, we're going to continue with Wildflowers because on Friday, this came out. I'll put it a little more towards the camera there. This is called Finding Wildflowers. These are like alternate takes or early takes, alternate versions of songs that appear on Wildflowers. So, for example, it has a version of You Wreck Me, and we all know You Wreck Me has these electric guitars and a hard rocking song. The version of You Wreck Me on Finding Wildflowers is played with acoustic guitars, but it still rocks. It's just a different sound. So this is sort of like, imagine there's an alternate universe somewhere where this was released, these versions of the songs were released as the Wildflowers albums, and then the versions of the songs that appear on here are their Finding Wildflowers. So, just in alternate versions. I'm having fun listening to this. Just, I'm so familiar with the songs that are on here that to hear the different versions that could have been is just an interesting. So in some alternate universe, this is Wildflowers, not this. Okay, so we've talked about some of the, I'm going to say newerish, the middle period Tom Petty. So why don't we go to some early Tom Petty. Damn the Torpedoes from 1979. It was their third studio album, and a lot of people said this is what put, even though they had some hits on their first two, this is what put them on the map. Allmusic.com, which reviews albums, a lot of albums, they said this is one of the greatest records of the album rock era. Colin Larkin, he's the editor-in-chief of the Encyclopedia of Popular Music. He says this is one of the all-time top albums ever. And Rolling Stone magazine, they ranked it as like 313 on the top 500 albums of all time. But they said this is the album where Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers hit it out of the ballpark. And if you read the songs that are on this in the back, you'd think you're reading Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers' greatest hits. Because, it starts out with Refugee, then there's Here Comes My Girl, then there's Even the Losers. Side 2 starts with Don't Do Me Like That. But you don't just listen to the albums for the hits. You listen for those other songs, those album tracks that are just as great. Shadow of a Doubt's on here. I'm a Complex Kid, Shadow of a Doubt, that's on here. And one of my favorite Tom Petty songs, which I think is very overlooked, called Louisiana Rain, is what closes this album. Louisiana Rain. So, if you have to, some early Tom Petty, Damn the Torpedoes. And unfortunately, not unfortunately, but, I didn't just listen to the albums, listen to it on the radio. I actually went to Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers concerts. I saw them a couple times. I'd have to go to go count my tickets. I still have all my ticket stubs to find out exactly how many. But my favorite Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers concert happened on June 23rd, 2013 at Saratoga Performing Arts Center. Of course, Crosby, Stills, and Nash were the opening act. Some nice harmony vocals with Crosby, Stills, and Nash. But during that set, it was Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, they just rocked. But during that set, they also played some really cool covers. They did I'm Not Your Stepping Stone, which is a song by the Monkees. I never thought that Tom Petty would play a song by the Monkees. And he also did Tweeter and the Monkey Man, which he recorded when he was in the Traveling Wilburys. It was just an awesome concert, and I just remember this really cool version of You Wreck Me at the end and American Girl. But I did see Tom Petty about a month before he died. That's where I got this shirt here, Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers 40th anniversary. I saw him about a month before he died at in Canandaigua. Wasn't one of my favorite shows, but nothing to do with Tom Petty. It's just where I was sitting probably wasn't the best. But unfortunately, Tom Petty's dead. We can't see any more Tom Petty or Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers shows. I would love for the Heartbreakers to go on tour, but I don't think it's going to happen. But we can still sort of celebrate Tom Petty's great musical live career. Get this album, Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, the live anthology, came out in 2009. It's live songs from the entire Heartbreakers career from the late 70s up until 2009. But they're not arranged in chronological order. You think they're going to start with like stuff from like the 70s, and then at the end it would be the 2000s. No, they arrange the songs as if they were playing a really long concert. So it's sort of like, maybe what a typical set list for a long, long Tom Petty concert would be is on here. And they don't just do, the album tracks or the hit songs. They also do some pretty cool covers. They have a version of Green Onions, which was recorded by Booker T and the MGs. They, believe it or not, they do a version of Goldfinger, the James Bond theme on this. Oh Well, which is an early Fleetwood Mac. I mean, not Stevie Nicks Fleetwood Mac, back when they were a psychedelic blues band. That's on here. And Mystic Eyes, which is a Van Morrison song, is also on here. So check out Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, the live anthology from 2009. And I believe there's an expanded version now, which includes a DVD. Okay, so I'm just going to... 2 more things, and then I'm done with this Tom Petty. I'm not done with Tom Petty, I'm just done with this video. But, if you're a Tom Petty fan, you can't forget the Traveling Wilburys. This is the Traveling Wilburys. This is the collection, which contains their both Traveling Wilburys Volume 1 and Traveling Wilburys Volume 3. Yes, there was no Traveling Wilburys Volume 2, just 1 and 3. But Tom Petty was an integral member of the Traveling Wilburys. You can see him right here. They all sang all the songs. There were harmony vocals. They traded parts of who was singing lead. But from the first album, the Tom Petty, Last Night, and The End of the Line definitely feature Tom Petty. And End of the Line features Tom Petty playing bass, too. And on Volume 3, Cool Dry Place is a Tom Petty song that he is predominantly featured on. So this is the Traveling Wilburys collection, but you can also get Traveling Wilburys Volume 1 and Traveling Wilburys Volume 3. And of course, for those of you real deep Tom Petty fans, you got Mud Crunch. This is Mud Crunch. I keep doing it wrong here. This is Mud Crunch 1, and this is Mud Crunch 2. Now, Mud Crunch was Tom Petty's original band he formed in Gainesville, Florida, back in the early 70s. They had some hits locally. They were, big locally in Gainesville, Florida. Decided to move to LA to try to become an even bigger band. They wanted to, but the record company, they recorded stuff, but nothing ever really, they didn't have any hit singles, so the record company dropped them. But they kept Tom Petty under contract. So he was under contract, but the band wasn't, and they fell apart. But 2 of the members of Mud Crunch, Mike Campbell and Ben Montet, they ended up becoming the basis of the Heartbreakers with Tom Petty. But then in 2007, Tom Petty, I'm famous, I can do what I want. He reassembles Mud Crunch, and one of the other members of Mud Crunch was Tom Leadon, who was the brother of Bernie Leadon from the Eagles. And 2007, they came out with Mud Crunch. Great album. Tom Petty plays bass in Mud Crunch, not guitar. So but Crystal, this song is worth it just for Crystal River, which is a nice jam. Goes on for about 10 minutes, and it's not a boring. Yeah, some people say, "Oh, a song goes on for 10 minutes, must be boring." No, it's a nice, cool little jam called Crystal River from Mud Crunch 1, or actually just called Mud Crunch. The other Mud Crunch is Mud Crunch 2, with the 2 bears on the cover. And actually, the song I like on this is called Beautiful World. It's not sung by Tom Petty. It's sung by the drummer for Mud Crunch, whose name is Randall Marsh. But this is a good album as well. Pick it up. So, I seem to have lost my notes here. They're on the floor. Hang on one second. So, what about you? Do you agree with the albums that the albums, the song? Do you agree with me? What's your favorite Tom Petty or Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers record, or Traveling Wilburys or Mudcrutch record? Do you have any special memories of Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers? Was there a concert that you saw that they did that was really, really, really good? So let me know in the comments, and I'll put out another video sometime. I don't know. I'm not quite sure when. But until then, to quote Mr. Neil Young, keep on rocking in the free world, and I'll see you later.